A heart attack never happens in a day, to be frank, right? It's a build-up of 10 years at least. So if you could watch yourself slowly, how your things are changing, digital twin modeling and all of that, you can actually avoid a lot of things, right? We can all avoid that. And that is where I think, we can move towards. And when you talked about bionic arm, I am wearing one. So that's there. So I think that's the present.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. I'm Roshan Cariappa. Our guest today went from building systems that monitor race cars to actually building systems that monitor patients' health. Mudit Dandwate is the co-founder and CEO of Dozee, which is a contactless remote patient monitoring and AI-based early warning system. I spoke to Mudit about some of the do's and don'ts of building in healthcare, working with hospitals, dealing with regulators, and what we can expect in the future with consumerization of healthcare and quantified self movements taking shape. This was a fun conversation, also a lot of insights in here on healthcare specifically. I hope you like it. Hey Mudit, welcome to the Startup Operator podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hey, hi Roshan, excited to be here.
Yeah, great to have you, Mudit. It's been a while since we've talked to healthcare founders. And, when I talk to founders operating in healthcare, I mean, a couple of things stick out, right? Usually with pretty much everyone that I've spoken to. One is there is some kind of trigger event that's happened in their life that led them to healthcare. And second, as a result of that, I mean, they're also solving healthcare through first principles. So I'd love to understand a little more about your background. How do you switch from mechanical engineering to healthcare specifically, and what have you discovered about the space that keeps you excited?
So, Roshan, as I mentioned, very excited to be here. And, I think two facets of your question. First, I'll talk about my background, right? So, I come from a race car engineering background. Before the startup, I actually used to work in racing industry, actually monitoring health of the vehicle and all of that. So, अगर आप वैसे देखो तो it's not a paradigm shift. I have only shifted from monitoring health of the race cars to now health of humans. But for me, the trigger event was one incident that happened in the family, and that's where I really found that how frail the entire infrastructure is for us. This was back in 2015, and while I was very young, passionate, using complex engineering problem, trying to make cars faster, I always thought that maybe if I could use my energy, time, and my skills into solving something which is so basic and kind of something which touches life of everyone, I could create more impact, right? And that's what led me to come back and think first principles, that how can really I make healthcare how it is supposed to be, very simple, so that it can be accessible, available to every Indian, right? So that's my.
Right. And from your experience of working in healthcare, I think over the last 6, 7 years now, can you just give us a lay of the land for an audience who doesn't have too much of an idea in terms of how the healthcare landscape is? Or what are the various stakeholders? How does the patient experience get impacted because of all of these folks? And what do you see as opportunities and challenges?
Correct. So I think healthcare per se is a very vast field, right? And in that there are different verticals. As in, of course, the vertical that where we work is to monitoring, diagnostics, and so on, right? But there are different other verticals like clinical services, where most of the hospitals you would imagine are there. Then a lot of home healthcare companies and so on, right? So that is one. Then providing these kind of services at home remotely, so telemedicine landscape is there. Then there are different kinds of techniques like imaging, AI, and all of this. These are vast landscape of healthcare. And in that, where we limit ourselves is towards making healthcare more data driven, and that's where monitoring of vitals plays a very important role, right? And that's the problem that we picked up as Dozee, that how we can make vitals, right, which forms a very important part, whether you are just sick or you are in hospital, right? You go to a doctor, the first thing that they do is actually see how your vitals are, right? So they will check your pulse, SpO2, respiration, and so on, right? Just to see what is your well-being level. And based on that, then higher treatment is done, right? Even when you are in ICU or in ward also, right? The first thing continuously that happens is either nurses are monitoring from a time to time, or in ICU it is done continuously, right? Because they give you a clear picture about your health, right? So that is where we operate. An idea was to kind of make it simpler. We'll talk about the solution bit a bit later. But since you talked about the landscape in India in terms of patient monitoring and hospital infrastructure, right? It is majorly based or segregated into public and private. In public, you can further segregate them into teaching hospitals like GMCs, district hospitals, and so on. And then at every block or division level, there are CHCs, and at every village level, there are PHCs. Similarly, in private hospital, private infrastructure as well, you have different levels of hospitals. So you have corporate hospital chains, then you have single, standalone, multi specialities, and then standalone hospitals, and then nursing homes, and so on, right? And together in India, we have 2 million hospital beds. And out of them, about 100,000 are ICU beds, right? So only 5% of them are monitored, and 95% remaining ones which are there, right, close to about 18.75 lakh, right? So only 125,000 are ICU beds, and 18.75 lakh which are there are manually monitored by nurses. So a nurse will go manually go near the patient, would take the vitals and so on, which consumes a lot of time, and also a lot of time it also leads to different sorts of inefficiencies as well into the system. And that's exactly where we thought that, if we could entirely automate that, it can really transform the entire industry, because then we are talking about making every bed a step down ICU. So if we could do that, we could really transform, because a lot of hospital adverse events which happen, right, happens in wards where continuous monitoring is not there, and because of that, events are captured very late. So if we could capture things early, timely actions are provided, a lot of in hospital adverse events could be avoided, and the healthcare can be amazing. So that's the hypothesis with which we went in. Yeah.
A couple of questions based on what you said, right? So one is COVID has been like a huge factor, right? I mean, over the last couple of years we've realized, a, how inadequate some of our healthcare infrastructure is, and b, the need for all of us to be a little more attentive to our health and immunity and all of those things. I think there's been a heightened awareness on that front. How has COVID changed healthcare in your opinion?
Right. So I think while everything was, already, as you mentioned, inadequate, probably COVID was the fact which was, which kind of highlighted that and put that urgency into the system. Entire nation was shook in that way. But actually, if you look at it, right, all throughout the data, right, what WHO suggests, if there needs to be one nurse every 300 patients, India has one nurse for 670 people, sorry, not patients. Similarly, the number of beds which are supposed to be there for the population that we have merely 44% of what is required. Even the ICU infrastructure and all of that. And that is what, fell kind of appalling when COVID, especially wave 2 came, right? And that's where the entire thing was highlighted. I would say one thing which did happen because of this was because this came into highlight. I think the adoption of technology, right? Because the existing infrastructure, when it started to fail, always, right, all throughout the history of human, right, whenever we wanted to deliver things at scale and high quality, we have always relied on technology, right? Be it green revolution, be it industrial revolution, or anything. So now that the task that we have on our hands, that we have to provide quality care to billions of people, I think again technology needs to be used, right? It can't be avoided anymore, and that is exactly what COVID did. Because of that, what happened was a lot of technologies were used. When they were used, they were actually impactful and helped us control the pandemic, which was a big unknown. And now that it has been done, I think now when we are rethinking the way even we are thinking about chronic care management, surgeries, and so on as well. So I think COVID in that way has changed the entire landscape of healthcare. In that way, it has leapfrogged at least 5 to 10 years, right, if not more, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's a very relevant point. I think India has this tendency of leapfrogging, right? Like leapfrogging to mobile and skipping PC per se. And I think in healthcare as well, I think we will probably leapfrog institutions and head to innovation and tech and everything. So one of the problems that we often encounter in healthcare is that incentives are misaligned. There is a deep mistrust in the system across the ecosystem. How do you work with these various stakeholders? Because if I see from their perspective, they're also justified, right? I mean, patient doesn't want to go to the hospital because they feel that, hey, I mean, I'm being screwed off of my hard-earned money. At the same time, I mean, when you look at hospitals as well, it's such a huge capex, and on top of that, very, very regulated, and there can be some arbit policy making as well that impacts them adversely. So, when you work in this sort of an ecosystem, how do you align priorities and incentives in such a way that it's mutually beneficial for both the patient and also the caregivers?
So you are absolutely right in that way, right? And I think that is the first principle of every business, right? If you have to be adopted, the interest should be aligned all across, right? The way we did that, I think, was that see, we are focusing on entirely improving the efficiency, right? Digitization, automation, and so on. When that happens, actually, if you think about it from a hospital's point of view, we are reducing a lot of costs. We are making systems very efficient. From a patient perspective, patient outcomes are improving. The way monitoring is happening, it's much more frequent, right? They are feeling that they are being taken care every second. There is something which is monitoring them. Their caretakers are much more happier. And not just that, if you think about it, even in a larger perspective, insurance as well. When adverse events go down, when code blue events go down, as in at the end of it, also insurance, who is also payer, not in India, not in a lot of cases, but in a good amount of way, or say, if not that, then public money is being used, right? So in a way, that is also being used in a much more efficient way. So when this entire ecosystem becomes more efficient, I think everyone benefits, and therefore, I think we got our break, and why hospitals are adopting Dozy today. And so I think that is something which I think every business it holds true to, that when you are entering the ecosystem, kind of everyone should benefit, and only then you can be in that system.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, and also, I mean, it's a very complex ecosystem as well, right? So you can't solve for one without like really taking care of the other links in the chain as well. All right, with that background, why don't we talk about Dozy? You know, how do you set it up? How do you go from idea to product to company? What are your most popular use cases right now? And just talk to us about what you're solving for.
Sure. So it all started from, I used to use a lot of vibration sensors, telemetry, analytics, both me and Gaurav, right? So we were colleagues over there, and in my previous job. And at that time, we realized that, if similar technology we could use for human health as well, we could make this entire complex system very simple. The first challenge that we gave to ourselves was that see, data is the crux of everything. We all talk about AI, ML, and n number of other things, right? But the basic building block of AI is data, right? If data collection itself is something which is very tricky, you have to put patches, wires, electrodes on people, then data itself doesn't come. And if data doesn't come, then you can't kick in the higher versions of technology either, right? So our ultimate goal, of course, was to use AI, ML to make the system efficient. But first thing first, we wanted to make the data collection itself very easy. And the way we wanted to approach that was that we wanted to make it entirely contactless. So Dozy is a contactless remote patient monitoring and early warning system. It's a thin sheet of sensor. So our proprietary technology, which is there, is that thin sheet of sensor that goes under the mattress, and without even touching the patient's body, it in principles monitor the micro vibration produced in every heartbeat, respiration, body movements, to that feeble vibrations that even when individual heart walls are also moving, right? It captures that, placed under the mattress. And mind you, this mattress can even be an 18-inch mattress. So once all of this data is collected, then this data is put on the server using our data pod. And that server has all the intelligence to actually then extract different biomarkers like heart rate, respiration rate, blood pressure, sleep apnea, heart rate variability, and different other clinical indices as well, right? So it extracts out of that, and then it puts it on the interface where clinicians can consume it either on their mobile phone or on the dashboards and so on, right? So it makes the entire system very efficient. The last part is the AI engine, which also does the trend monitoring, and if there is any kind of abnormal trend, then it gives an alert, right? So that timely help can be given, and lives can be saved. So this is the entire ecosystem over there. So it literally upgrades any bed into a step down ICU, be it hospital bed or be it home bed. And we have two versions of the product, one for hospital as well as for home as well.
Right. That's pretty fascinating. So you're selling to hospitals and you're selling to individual consumers as well, right? How does it work in terms of customer acquisition and stuff, right? So what is it triggered for like a hospital to procure something like a Dozee? What is the value proposition? And similarly, when do consumers reach out to you and adopt Dozee?
So our primary product where we had so far put a lot of focus on was our hospital product. The way we approach that is through our sales channel. They approach the hospital, they explain the value proposition. Our key value proposition is automating, digitizing the patient monitoring inside non-ICU wards and making the entire system much more efficient, right? So that is our key value proposition, and we do it through our sales team, which is now in close to about 20 cities all across India. And we do the demo of the product, and then eventually when our customers see that this is so efficient and easy to use, they do adopt. So that is how it goes. In terms of home product, that is something which we have not really fully launched yet so far. That also we work through our hospital channels itself, that when this patient who has been in the ward and they in HDU or something like that, in a post discharge setting, if the hospital feels that they want to monitor for a prolonged time even at home also, right, so then they can also start using it at home as well. So that is how that generally happens, right, so far. But going ahead, we are trying to open it up further, right? So like one of the use case which I personally use it for is my parents are in Nagpur and I am here in Bangalore. So on a day to day basis, how do I ensure that their health is okay? So I can use it to do that. So we are trying to create kind of a GTM over there, working with different corporates, elder care institutes, and so on. So that is how we go about.
Right. Interesting. Building in healthcare is different from, say, building a consumer internet startup, right? I mean, you can't really fail fast. You don't really have a version of an MVP per se. It has to be absolutely spot on when you bring it to market, because I think the stakes are higher, right? I mean, you're dealing with people's lives as such. And, we've seen examples of Theranos, for example, right? And what happened with that. What are some do's and don'ts in terms of building in healthcare that you've realized?
So I think I think you touched some very key points over there, right? I think in healthcare it is, as you mentioned, it's not do fast, fail fast, get it right faster, right? All those kind of philosophies don't work. What you need to do is you need to clearly define what you are building, why you are building, and then first thing first, get some anchor clients with you right from the inception and build it with them, right? It is very critical, right? So right from inception we were fortunate to get some help from likes of institutions like Nimhans, Jaydeva, Ames, where we could actually build it. We could use it in the lab, ensure that what we are building is clinical grade before we launch it in the market. And then of course it's a long haul about regulations and all of that. And not just you are building it for India, but when you are building it internationally, right, then it gets even more complex as well, and complexity keeps on getting up and up and up and up as well. But I think what is important is to define the MVP, which is easiest to get in the market, work with the anchor clients, get it in the market, learn, add things, and keep on making things as complex as it is required. And that is it. And if we can do that part, it is, as you mentioned, it's hard, but still doable. But one thing that keeps you always going, right, is that when you actually see that your initial few products which were used, Dozee itself, right? I'll give you some examples of that. We could hear some stories that how it saved a life. A nurse said that watching the alert, I quickly went there. I saw that his heart rate was dropping. I administered this and saved a life. Now that is what keeps us going all the time, right? And so far we have heard now tremendous on an everyday basis. Now we hear these stories, right? So that is what is the ultimate feeling out there.
Amazing. You brought up regulation, and healthcare is a highly regulated space for good reason, right? I mean, as I mentioned, I think the stakes are higher. How do you work with these different organizations and bodies and so on? How do you get past all of these regulatory hurdles and policy frameworks and stuff? What is the way you've discovered is the shortest tangent to, complying with all of these stuff?
Right. So, see, regulatory, although it is there, but it is also well defined as well. Right. It's not entirely vague. To be frank, it is not that crystal clear either. So it does some working, but if we can take some cues, especially from outside India, right? FDA, CE, they have marked policy pretty solid way. At least from a devices point of view, I would say AI and softwares are still, defined vaguely all over the place. So that is where, you have to be more creative about it. Although you are going in, there are no standards as such, then you have to create some standards. You have to put the benchmarks, then you have to consult with the KOLs that, agar one example, right? If I am creating a BP algorithm, then what is the acceptable range, right? That I could use, right? Probably I could use from, say, Hypertensive Society of India, US, UK, right? Follow some standards over there and then build it on from there, right? So that is how it goes. So, long answer short, again, summarizing that some of these things are very well defined. So we need to follow that. There is no ambiguity around that, but where there is ambiguity, where we feel like things are not properly defined, then as an entrepreneur you have to define it and get it done.
Right. What do you have coming up in the next 18 to 24 months? You mentioned, your B2C product, right, which is selling directly to individuals and consumers. Have you launched that already? What else can we expect from you? I mean, are you growing internationally as well?
Yeah, we are launching some exciting products, right? I think we are about a quarter away from few big launches. I think so. Dozee birthday happens on October 8th, so that's where we do our launches. So we do have a pipeline of that. So yes, B2C product is something that we are coming up with, especially for parent care, right? That is one. Then version 2 of the hospital product also is coming up, right? Which has some more upgrades in terms of communication features, the number of parameters that it monitors, and so on as well. Right. So that is the other one. Apart from that, from a regulatory perspective, we are selling in India for a while, right? So we are also looking at international regulatory approvals as well. Outside India as well, we will start working in a microwave, but again, that is not the focus for this year at least.
Right. Healthcare is so exciting, right? When I look at a future, I mean, you're seeing this whole consumerization of healthcare. You have, wearables, the quantified self movement, and so on. And, like you mentioned earlier, COVID has sort of given us a head start by 5 or 6 years on some of these fronts, right? When you look at the crystal ball, I mean, if you gaze into the future, right, what do you see happening over the next 5, 10, 15 years? I mean, will we walk around with bionic arms or something at some point of time?
Yes, I think all of that is pretty feasible, and not just that, as in that's the present in a lot of ways. I'll expand a little bit on that. So if you see, actually the life cycle of healthcare, right? So it all started from, I would say that first step is towards, treatment, right? And kind of interventions. And that is something what we have perfected in last 3 decades or so, right? Today, if people can actually reach hospital in time, for most of the things, as in help can be provided and life will be saved, right? We have reached there, and therefore what has happened is our life expectancy has kind of grown, right? But what has happened because of that is that then we are managing our condition for a longer time, and therefore I think now the decade will be about management of the condition at home, right? We will have to learn to live with some of the conditions that happens, especially with age, so likes of Parkinson's and diabetes and heart conditions and so on, right? So therefore, that is what you see. A lot of these devices, a lot of these things, why they are coming into picture is that when you are managing something for chronic disorder, a participatory approach is something which needs to be there. अब बस एक डॉक्टर दवाई दे देगा एंड यू वोंट बी डन राइट. इट्स अबाउट अब आपको उसको मैनेज करना है ओवर टाइम, एंड यू हैव टू सी योर सेल्फ एज वेल, राइट? एंड देयर फोर these devices and these entire movement about quantified self and all that can be revolutionary, क्योंकि a heart attack never happens in a day, to be frank, right? It's a build up of 10 years at least. So if you could watch yourself slowly, मतलब how your things are changing, digital twin modeling and all of that, so you can actually avoid a lot of things, right? We can all avoid that. And that is where I think we can move towards. And when you talked about bionic arm, I am wearing one. So, so that's there. So I think that's the present.
Right, right. Yeah, very interesting for sure. From a business perspective or a market perspective, we've seen a correction, right? I mean, clearly, the 2021 bull run is over. The S&P has corrected, I think, 18-20% over the last 6 months. Nifty has corrected maybe around 8-10%. There's a lot of pessimism that's again creeping in. When you look at this as a founder, right? I mean, this is an externality that you can't avoid. What are some of those changes that you're doing to your business to kind of survive and actually thrive during this downturn?
So, this, I even talked to my team in a very lengthy way. I think one of the things that we internally spoke about was that, when basically it rains, right, it shows that, who is a better driver wins the race rather than one having a better car, right? I'm talking about the race car philosophy over there, right? So idea is that, now that we have a proven product, we have capital at our disposal. At that time, really, I think this is going to be a very critical time because it is a time to really capture the market and establish ourselves as a prominent player in this industry, in this geography, and that is what we are looking at.
Right. Yeah, and healthcare is kind of recession proof, right? I mean, it's not a discretionary spend in that sense.
See, people get careful everywhere, people become cost conscious everywhere. I think PE just affects everyone, right? For that matter. Right. So, yes, there will be some effect even on healthcare as well, but you are right in that way, right? Healthcare is a basic thing, right? As people are getting more population is there, diseases are increasing, and so on, there needs to be more help out there, right? And at the end of it, how I think about it is use of technology only is there to make things more efficient, right? And that actually makes the case even stronger, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah. Hey, this has been a fascinating chat. I've understood various facets of healthcare. Before we sign off, what are some books or podcasts that you would recommend to our audience, particularly maybe if they're interested in understanding more about healthcare and so on? What are some resources that they should refer to?
I try to stay away a little bit from healthcare, because however much I avoid, I can't stay away from healthcare. So I don't read up a lot or listen a lot about healthcare per se. But the startup operator is definitely one podcast that I do listen to, especially from a startup world to be updated and all that. The other one that I recently heard, right, and it really affected me in that way. It's not related to healthcare, but as an innovator and all that, I think Mission ISRO by Harsha Bhogle. I think that was something which was amazing, right? And something which is very go to whenever I'm driving or anything like that. In terms of books, same because of that podcast. I think today, nowadays, I'm reading one India That's Bharat. The other one is Wings on Fire. As an I had regretted I had not actually read that earlier. So Abhi, I got one copy and now I'm reading that, right? So of course, very amazing thought. So I would say, India, we are really privileged from that perspective that, the kind of founding fathers we had in terms of technology and space research and a lot of, what we are today owe that much to, all of these big thought leaders whom we had in past, right? And who have done some amazing work. And, if I could do something to replicate even 1% of that, right, I would feel myself as very fortunate. So that's what I live for.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, that's a great note to end the podcast on. Hope that founders like you can continue the tradition of innovation that we've had. Thank you again for making the time, Mudit. Really appreciate it. This was a fun chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj.
If you enjoyed this podcast, consider subscribing and leaving a review on your favorite platform. Also, get updates delivered straight to your WhatsApp inbox by clicking on the link in the description.